All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We're here to talk about the future of virtualization post Broadcom. And at this point, everyone's heard and or experienced the impact of the licensing changes. And we're looking forward to having a conversation with you all on our viewpoint and sharing a variety of ways in which we are currently assisting our partners and customers. To introduce everyone that's speaking today, I'm Caitlin Fitzgerald. I'm the regional manager at Tintri for the Southeast and Mid-Atlantic. I specialize in on-prem and cloud storage solutions tailored for virtualized workloads. In the past year, my role has kind of evolved from just selling an appliance that is really good at managing VMs to helping customers stay on a platform that is really good at managing VMs that doesn't break the budget. We also have Tony Best. He's the president of Tensys Technology. He has over 15 years experience in consulting. He's held positions of executive management, virtualization lead, infrastructure architect, including working at Tintri as an SE. He also has a decade of experience in corporate IT supporting open systems and storage applications like SQL and Oracle. And then Chris Gallimore, he is my awesome SE here at Tintri. He's been with us for 7 years. He spent 7 years prior to that at VMware as an SE, and then 7 years at EMC as well. Just some housekeeping. We want the session to be very interactive, but please make sure you remain on mute until we open it up for the Q&A towards the end. However, please feel free to drop any question or comment in the chat box. All right, so to kick things off, we know why we are all here. The acquisition of Broadcom has created a very disruptive situation that we haven't seen in a long time. And we're aware that it is not related to a technical innovation, really just the financial consequences of Broadcom's decision to focus on their most profitable clients. We're having conversations with customers that are seeing a 3 to 5x increase on their renewal cost. However, we are not bashing VMware in any way. 95% of our customers are currently running on VMware. We still think it's the best hypervisor. It's not going anywhere. Broadcom's revenue is continuing to grow. Analysts are predicting only around a 20% move off of VMware, and most businesses simply don't want to deal with the complicated migration. However, we know that some people may be looking at their bill, wondering what to do, and we have options to share with you, ranging from making it more financially feasible if you choose to stay with the status quo or moving to alternatives like Hyper-V or even going to the cloud. And Matt, if you can, please throw up the poll questions for us. So we want to know, relating to your renewal, what are you seeing? And if you're considering switching hypervisors or to a new platform, what options are you looking at? So I'll give everyone a minute or two to answer those. Matt, can you let me know when a good time would be to go to the next slide? I can't see as the results come in.
You're good.
Okay, I'm good to go.
Yes.
Okay. So Tony's going to drill into the takeaways after year one, but just to preface that, what Chris and I are hearing from clients is that they need an option that is affordable, scalable, doesn't send them back into time, and when they look into what's out there, all of those boxes are not being filled. And we're seeing a lot of folks delaying decisions while maybe they're doing some cleanup to their VMware environment, trying to get their licensing costs down, waiting to see what the market decides for them. And oftentimes that is causing a scramble. So Tony and Chris are going to do a great job providing some education on the topic and the options on how we can assist in planning to avoid being forced to make any last minute decisions. And even if you are in a situation where you need to make a last minute decision, we have options to assist there as well. So I'll go ahead and Tony, pass it over to you.
Thanks, Caitlin. So yes, thanks everyone for joining today. So as Caitlin said, we're at this point right now where our customers and IT community is looking for evaluating options through the VMware, whether you're an enterprise shop or you're a non-for-profit or mid-sized company. We find that all organizations are going through a similar process of evaluation, or at least asking the question of what's next. So as mentioned, the near term, most organizations are status quo because of the time frame from the time that Broadcom purchased VMware to getting their bills. The amount of time they had to actually make a switch is not very significant. They're also looking at hyperconverged infrastructure. So your Nutanix, your Scale IO solutions, which in large part looking at those for the advantage of looking at the different hypervisor. But adopting that infrastructure to acquire hypervisor comes with its own financial impacts and complexities. The cloud, companies are re-looking at the cloud. Cloud is not new, but for whatever reason, companies chose not to move to the cloud initially. Some of them are taking a renewed look at it. But at the same time, there are companies that are also saying that cloud costs have gotten out of hand. So they're also seem to be at some point hamstrung in their direction because whatever reason they chose not to go to the cloud initially, those constraints are still there, cost being just one of them. The next is switching hypervisors altogether. So lately you've heard a lot of talk about Proxmarks, about XCP and G, as well as some other ones. HP just came out with their own hypervisor, which typically are based on either Citrix Zen backend or KVM. But the challenge with those is the certification process of the applications. Most applications anymore were written and are supported on VMware, which has been the predominant hypervisor the past 15, 20 years. So just putting VMs on a new hypervisor, especially for larger organizations like healthcare and financial services, is not an option in the near term. And the next is KubeVirt. So, some form of containerization, which many tout as being the future, but applications need to be written, work process need to be rewritten. So that's not a short-term solution for many organizations, but they are evaluating it. Next slide, please. So migrations, not trivial. We've been on VMware as a predominant platform, as I said, like 15, 20 years. So for myself personally, I did thousands of P2V migrations, physical to virtual migrations. But in the past 15 years or so, 20 years or so, it's been a VM of some form or another, either on premise or on the cloud. So many organizations don't have the staff, or in some cases, the embedded knowledge on migrating from one platform to another in the workflow. There's impacts that require change management. There's costs associated with that because the existing environment has to run side by side with the target environment, right? So if you're going from, like, say, a Nutanix from VMware, Nutanix is its own infrastructure, its own hypervisor. So your existing infrastructure has to run side by side as you migrate to the Nutanix platform. That's true of a lot of solutions. Even if you're going to a pure, you have to have enough capacity, disk capacity to run side by side with the existing VMware. And if you choose a different hypervisor altogether, understanding that the underlying file system is different. So they're not going to share the same LUNs. So that creates challenges and complexities. What we're seeing is that organizations, if they do make any migrations, they're taking the easiest workloads first, the non-business critical migrations to reduce their footprint in VMware. But that doesn't eliminate the burden on the staff, as again, to do these migrations Most organizations will do them off hours on weekends, and that's on top of their existing workload. And then the next is not a trivial one as well. Your DR backup strategy. What software you're using to backup, what's your DR strategy? If whatever you're doing in production has to be mimicked in DR. So if you are standing up a Nutanix as a target, if you will, hyperconverged infrastructure as a target in production, you'd have to do that as well in DR. So that way there's no gaps in your DR or your backup strategy. Next slide. So approximately 1 year in, the deal closed with Broadcom VMware, I believe, November of 2023. So we're just about a little over a year since the acquisition actually closed. And so year one, we're seeing that organizations are both migrating and also staying put, right? They're actually migrating what has been termed as low value or low impact machines off of VMware to somewhere else. Again, because from a time standpoint or just from the applications and impact to the business, they don't want to take everything, the most mission critical workloads. And so the mission critical workloads are staying put. Also, there's also, as I mentioned, the pivot, right? So cloud has been the predominant target when organizations rather have been moving off of VMware, moving to the cloud. But now organizations looking at that to not quite seeing the cost savings that they thought they were going to see on the cloud. So some of them are also pivoting back. There's also an issue of control. And lately, the big buzz, especially in enterprise place, is artificial intelligence. AI likes to have some local affinity to the data. So it's not just moving the compute, but if you have a large workload when it comes to the data set for machine learning, that likes to be local to the data on premise. So with that, a couple of statements are the adoption of moving tends to be a phased approach, and a lot of those migrations tend to stall. We've seen plenty of cloud migrations that have stalled. So there's concern that VM migrations might stall as well. And when you look at, as I mentioned before, all of the different pieces that go into migration, the change management, application impact, skills, um, we're seeing this play out, and that the transition from VMware is not happening as fast as you would think based on the feeling of organizations in IT. So when Chris goes into his overview of the Tintri solution, he's going to address all these points and how Tintri addresses each one of these that actually makes it easier on organizations to adopt an actual strategy as to what they want to do going forward. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Chris.
Great. Thanks so much, Tony. So I'm the lucky guy who gets to be the fix-it here. So you guys had to give all oh, well, we got this going on and that going on, and I get to fix it. So here's how you're going to fix it. So let me start off with just a like kind of vision of virtualization and when we're talking about virtualization, not just the server and the hosting infrastructure, but your entire environment. So whether you're leveraging an on-premise solution, a cloud solution, whether you're using database infrastructure, whether you're using hypervisors, whatever you're using, what is our vision of how that should be run? So first and foremost, because of I think largely to do with the Broadcom acquisition of VMware, we need freedom of choice. You need the ability to move back and forth across different vendors, the platform vendors, to move your workloads where they're most efficient, whether that's and that includes cost, right? Where most efficient and they're running well and simply and easily, so they're not taking a lot of your time, but also the cost. So as part of that, you need, to support that, you need performance predictability. You need the ability again, to remove your time and effort in ensuring that performance is available and ready to go, as well as simplifying your management, your day-to-day activities, your storage-based profiles and optimization. You want that to be very simple, and as you grow, you want to be able to expand without any complexity there as well. And then, in order when the issues do arise, since they always will, we need visibility, right? We need the ability real time to see what's happening with our workloads and where that's going and how we can improve and fix the situation if something were to go wrong. So I'm going to drill into these a little bit, each of these. Caitlin, if you go to the next slide, we can start drilling in. So particularly around freedom of choice, we need like hypervisor agnosticism, whatever that word is, but also the ability to take advantage of some of these other uh, methodologies, right, for platforms, like Tony was referring to. So if you want to try out KubeVirt, you want to try out Hyper-V, you want to try out the cloud maybe for your VM workloads, what we want to provide you that freedom of choice so that you can have on Tintri an option to to test these out, to run them, and possibly to move that some of your workloads there. So we're going to provide you that freedom of choice and the ability to run databases, containers, and virtual machines side by side. Next slide. So with Tintri, kind of what's the secret sauce here? Because you're probably thinking to yourself, well, any storage array I buy, from any vendor would allow me to run any workload, right? I can run databases and Hyper-V and VMware on any storage array. Well, the difference is the intelligence. So in order to get all of those higher level capabilities, you need to have a solution that understands the workloads. So if you consider any of our competitors, pretty much, I can't think of one that can do what we can do in terms of separating these and isolating these workloads. They traditionally will build some sort of volume, and then you'll put your workloads into that volume. So you'll put a number of VMs onto a LUN, for example. And what that creates is this conventional effect on the left that's forcing all of these IOs into a single lane. So if someone decides to do 200,000 IOs right now, that's going to create a traffic jam, and everything behind it, all the other workloads that you might have, hundreds or even 1,000 workloads that are trying to get through this traffic jam. They're all waiting for that to that traffic to complete. So what Tintri does is really understands each of the workloads from an IO perspective, from a read-write ratio, et cetera, everything you can think of technically. And if someone's trying to grab all the resources of the system, it just simply won't allow it. It'll just throttle those 200,000 IOs and say, just hold on a minute. We're going to get to you. Just trust me on this, but we got to get all through the rest of the traffic too. Like the CEO's desktop workload is just as important as that data warehouse that needs 200,000 IOs. So what Tintri does is per workload and understanding those, and really all the way down to the vDisk for if we're talking about VMware. We can drill down so that each of your applications is getting the workload and sub-millisecond response time. So that's kind of the angle there for optimizing those workloads. So we're gonna, like I said, we're drilling into each of these. So simplicity is basically based on these three areas. So you need to have predictable performance so that you're not managing performance on a regular basis. You shouldn't have to be moving. A LUN gets busy, and I need to move that one of the workloads off of that to another LUN. That's just a waste of time. So we're going to isolate all these workloads and again give them the resources that they need. You need visibility in terms of being able to do real-time analysis in terms of this application has just started to overrun the resources that it needs from a host perspective or even from a storage perspective. And then I need analytics to provide me over time some information about how I'm growing. So am I running out of host resources? Am I running out? So this gives you the ability that before you have an actual issue, you can prepare for that. You can prepare by adding more storage, for example, or adding more host capacity or more CPUs, whatever it happens to be for that particular workload. And then accelerating your productivity. So what we're trying to do there is give you the ability, like, so if you need to do a test workload, you want to put in a new application. We want you to be able to clone instantaneously your production environment and test it out. Maybe you move it to a different hypervisor and test that out. Maybe, you're adding, doing an upgrade to an application. Maybe you're doing software development. So you'd like to spin up 1,000 VMs overnight off of production so that you have a clear data set to work with the next day. Any of these things can be done so rapidly when you have the ability to take those storage-based snapshots and clones at the actual workload level. So it just gives you that ability to grow rapidly and just simplify your operations day to day. Next slide. So drilling a little bit more into this idea of performance predictability. So how are we doing that? So we have this AI engine essentially that is automating quality of service, and we talked a little bit about it. The goal of it being to provide sub-millisecond response time to every workload on the system. So that AI engine basically balances out the workloads, understands them, and it doesn't matter if they are a VMware hypervisor, a Hyper-V hypervisor, a SQL database, or a Kubernetes container. All of these things can be balanced at the same time based on their application level workload versus whatever the LUN's doing. So we have that visibility directly into that, and that allows the system to understand those workloads and what their requirements are, which additionally gives you the ability to detect anomalies. So if I suddenly have something occurring differently on a workload, you can get an alert. Hey, it looks like you're using 30% more storage resources suddenly for this device, or which could indicate a ransomware. Someone's trying to encrypt those drives or something, and all of a sudden performance is skyrocketing on that particular application, something along those lines. So gives you that all sorts of capabilities become available once you understand at this level. Next slide. So, and drilling in then in addition to the performance capability here, if we actually have the visibility at the workload, then we always have a picture of both real time what's happening and then historical data on these systems. And this is kind of the view. This is just giving you more of a view of what that would look like. So you could see in the latency column there, you'll see that green, and so we know since we work with this, that green is host latency. So you could see that, hey, that one system has host latency. And then I can drill in to that and say, oh, what is it? Is it CPU or memory? Where's the problem with that particular workload? So you can't see that in a traditional environment because you're looking at the LUN or the volume as a whole. You're not able to see that, oh, I've got this actual latency on this device. So, and even better, it is real time. So if we see that CPU, we go and add a CPU to that VM, we can instantly see what happened if that improved the situation. So we don't have to be getting information back from the the user saying, oh yeah, it's working better now. We can see it instantly, and then say, well, that didn't work. Let's try something different, and maybe just accelerating the time to debug these and these systems. So next slide. So again, on ease of management. So just continuing on that kind of that vein there. So you not only do you want to be able to see performance predictability both over time and real time, but you need to be able to set policies. So if anyone's familiar with doing VMware snapshots, I worked at VMware for about 8 years, and after year 4, I really wanted to leave because everyone was telling me that the VMware snapshots were a pain, and I was constantly going in and helping people clean out these nested loops of VMware snapshots. So it's a lot easier to do certain functions at the storage array level. And then it's easier still if you really have this understanding of what the workloads are. So for example, in this example, we're showing a synchronous replication, but we could just as easily be setting a policy for high frequency snapshots for ransomware, prevention. But in this case, so we're looking at synchronous replication. All I had to do basically was point to the other VMs, right click on this VM and point to the other VM store and turn it on. So that's just a single VM, but we could set that up into the group of VMs and create that. We have customers doing this all over. Caitlin and I have one down the street here that's has a warm room that gets warmer in the summer, so they fail out of that room and make a data center, a different data center that's very cold in the winter, their primary data center in the summer, and they just go back and forth as needed. So, but there's, obviously synchronous replication gives you the ability, any kind of hardware failure is protected. So it just makes all these actions very, very simple so that you can set up those scenarios. Sorry, Caitlin. You can set up those scenarios very simply, and you're not spending hours and hours trying to get the protection and availability that you need. So we talked a little bit about growth. So you also want to be able to understand and predict, what you're going to need 6 months from now, a year from now. This used to be a massive exercise because of the cost of the hardware, and hardware is still expensive. So what Tintri's done here is allow you to scale a drive at a time. So the RAID set is built. You never have to deal with RAID. It's RAID 6, but you never have to deal with it. You don't look at it. You don't mess with it. Whenever you need a new drive or you need more space, you just add more drives. If you run out of drives in that system, add another system, and you can start with 10 drives. So you start small if you like, and just build it over time. We have customers that just order another drive every 6 months. So saving you money and just making it very efficient and simple. So one thing we sort of touched on, we've kind of been focused a little bit on the hypervisor side of things, but in terms of the cloud and specifically this Broadcom acquisition, if you're looking at, a stopgap solution, or you want to look at a less expensive or more predictable cloud platform for VMware in specific, we have the perfect option here. So the Tintri Cloud platform, basically, it's a premier service. So we're talking about tier 5 data centers running VMware. So you can lift and shift your workloads out to the cloud and pay less than you would with one of the giant hypervisors. Quite a bit less, actually. Less even if you are actually to re-platform and move them out to another environment. And I think what we need here, me specifically, I believe that what we need is a solution that provides you some flexibility. So in this case, we want to use, most of our customers already understand, most of the, it's like Caitlin says, 90% of people are using VMware. It's probably 70% across the board. So those people, don't want to hire new people that understand Hyper-V or Kubernetes. Let's stick with VMware in the short term and see how this goes. So one way to do that is just to move your workloads out to the cloud temporarily. And this service provides everything that you need. So every bit of software, not just VMware software, Microsoft software, the monitoring software, backup software, anything that you need is all provided for you with a simple one cost line item per month. You're not going to get egress fees or any other surprises. You're just going to get a very simple and high-end platform for running your virtual machines. So that's our option for the cloud. Then we were talking about running Kubernetes and containers side by side with VMs. And Tony touched on possibly looking at KubeVirt. So what we can do with Kubernetes in the next release, just to be clear, is we're able to run Kubernetes containers, the persistent volumes, on the Tintri array and give you the same kind of workload level views of those volumes and activities. So to the point where you can reach through into a KubeVirt session and see the VMs and what their activity is, how many IOs they're doing, what the read-write mix is, what the compression et cetera, is on those individual KubeVirt VMs. So another potential alternative, you move your clouds to another hypervisor, you move them to the cloud, stay with VMware for the time being, and perhaps you take a look at using KubeVirt, especially if you're doing software development or something that requires Kubernetes in the first place. But that's another alternative that I feel is going to be important down the road here. Next slide. So finally, we have a big giant wrapper to wrap all of this up together. So separate from the Tintri itself, or the cloud, either one, is a management platform that is a control plane that's basically separated, allows you to manage all your workloads in one place. Can manage multiple systems, across multiple devices, etc. So very simple. So with that, I think we should open it up to questions. If everyone feels like that's where we should go right now. I did want to point out, if you're interested in this and you want to take a look deeper at these different alternatives, we'd love to do a feasibility assessment. Just give you an idea of what we see in terms of, we'll run an RV tools and we'll pull that together and we'll show you potentially what it could cost you to move to the cloud, what it would cost you to stay on premise, what it would cost you versus the large hyperscalers like AWS, Azure. So that's something we can provide for you free of cost.
So Chris, this is Tony.
Yeah.
I have a question. So the poll came back and there's a percentage of folks are looking at XCP-ng and Hyper-V. So and maybe you can pull up the actual running dashboard. But if I'm going to deploy, I have VMware and I want to evaluate XCP-ng next to my VMware, can I just run those side by side in the same box with the same panel, the same visibility from the dashboard?
Yes, I'd love to show that to you. Maybe if we have some interest there, we'll be happy to show that. But the difference, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, Tony, was the difference from, and you know this, I know, but running this on Tintri versus traditional storage array is you're actually going to have the visibility down to the VM or the vDisk level. So, and we have a geek out that Matt helped us put together that shows in that geek out, we show taking a VMware VM, migrating it to a Hyper-V VM, and then showing it running, all of this running on the Tintri and showing how the analytics that we get immediately off of that VM and what the differences are. So it's a beautiful thing for evaluating other alternatives because you're going to see exactly what the workloads look like in different environments, how they behave. And they will obviously run side by side with all those analytics and visibility available to you.
So like as opposed to a competitor where there's no zoning or formatting of LUNs, so you don't have to actually carve out separate space and be able to balance out how much you give to, say, XCP-ng or Hyper-V and how much you give to VMware, correct?
Yeah, great point. So you don't have to carve off another LUN and format it for Hyper-V or VMware. You just migrate the workload from one to another, and you now have complete visibility. I mean, down to the point where I can tell you what your compression ratio is, what your dedupe ratio is on that VM, whether Hyper-V versus VMware. So you'll have all the information you need to show to management if you're doing that, or to report back on, hey, this is what it's going to look like if we move over to Hyper-V, because we've run it here and we know what it looks like. So and you can clone off a VM, and then that's what we did in the demo. We cloned one of the VMware VMs, migrated to Hyper-V, and then turned it on. Just gives you tremendous flexibility and visibility into what your operations are looking like.
So that means for DR, then if I have a Tintri box in production, a Tintri box in DR, I can actually just begin replicating right away without having to stand up in a different storage array. I have to have different hosts, but the actual back end and the actual protection groups and policies, I can just keep them on the same box and replicate them over.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, like in that synchronous replication example, your description is apt. So you'd have two different systems in different locations with connectivity to one another, and then you're behind the scenes, you're replicating the bits of the data across the wire for just that specific VM. So again, since we know what that object is, we can push it across. If it was same goes for if it's a SQL database, which becomes super valuable for SQL databases instead of availability zones, that type of thing. You just use snapshotting with Tintri, and you have a single copy instead of multiple copies of that data. Save space. But yeah, in your replication example, either asynchronous or synchronous, depending on the distance and the SLAs, the setup time is negligible because the only thing that you want to be aware of is making sure you have the ability to recover those VMs. So some sort of some sort of a tool like you know uh, to to basically manage that run book that you would have to recover those VMs. So or do a test recovery. Does that answer your question?
Yep, it does. Anyone on the call from a migration standpoint, the folks that were looking at evaluating Hyper-V or NTG, sorry, I always get that wrong. XCP-NG.
XCP.
Yeah. To share any thoughts as to why the direction you're looking at going with those hypervisors?
I saw one question in there, Tony. How easy is it to run more than one hypervisor at a time? So it's as easy. It doesn't. There's nothing special on Tintri. The only thing you have to do is make Tintri aware of the management platform for that VM. So in VMware's case, vCenter. In Hyper-V's case, you can use SCVMM or you can use Hyper-V Manager. And same goes for Zen and KVM workloads. So you just once you connect to the management console or management system, then it understands that workload. It immediately says, okay, I see the VM over here on the management side, and I can now see all the bits that are related to those virtual machines. And I can separate those and isolate those and take actions on those like snapshotting and replication.
So basically, you have one shared backend. The only thing that has to be added additionally is just to compute, right? So if you have, 3 hosts for VMware and you want to stand up a Hyper-V node, you have to buy a couple servers, 2 or 3 servers Hyper-V, and the same thing for XCP and G. Stand those up,
That's right.
but they can all point to the same backend VM store.
That's right. That's right. You just network them in and you're good to go.
Any other
So I
questions
think
or
that
comments? All right. Looks like Magnus had a question. Chris?
I think that's a comment. He's insulting Hyper-V.
But he
Yeah,
does bring up a
he's
good point.
saying, yeah, he does.
Go ahead and finish up. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
No, he does bring up a good point because he's saying that Hyper-V needs an SMB mount point versus NFS. So in evaluating your different hypervisors, so the XCP, NG, and Proxmox, for example, they work natively with NFS. So I have seen some customers' evaluations when they're going to like a block level implementation for their storage, it induces some challenges because while those hypervisors will work with block. It just adds another level of complexity having to do a block mount versus an NFS mount, because those two hypervisors in particular, they're by nature, they like NFS. Would you agree with that, Chris?
Yeah, that's their best for us in particular, especially, but for anywhere that's the best platform for that.
Mhm.
That's the best protocol. So thanks for that, Magnus.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Please feel free to reach out to us.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.